Happy Sabbath. We're here again with another session of Caring for Your Mind. Last week, we talked about depression and the cognitive distortions, in other words, the lies that we tell ourselves. Keep those in mind because those are going to be important also for this week's subject. This week's subject is anxiety, the escape artist. As you saw in the introduction, is the most prevalent mental health issue in the United States and in the world. But what exactly is anxiety? Anxiety is not just mere stress or nervousness. Anxiety is our bodily reaction to fear. And anxiety disorders are specifically dealing with fears that are out of proportion from the reality. It's normal for us to be scared and have fears to things that are a threat to us. It's a survival mechanism. But when that survival mechanism is in overdrive and we are responding in fear to common situations in our lives, then it becomes a problem. It hinders our ability to function in our jobs, in our relationships, in any normal way that we're supposed to function. It hinders us. So basically, anxiety is the anticipation that something is going to happen that is associated with muscle tension, avoidance behavior, and other physiological responses. The interesting thing with anxiety is that it's not just about what our thoughts are telling us. Our body is responding as if there is an immediate threat. So we feel the physiological response in our body as if it was happening. Once again, as you can see in the slide, the brain scan, PET scan, of different anxiety disorders. The first one on the left side is a normal brain. But in the middle, you can see how overactivated it is when somebody's anxious. And in the last part of the slide, in the right-hand side, is the OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders. It's also associated with anxiety. So what are the different types of anxiety disorders? There's more than one type, and one of the reasons that is the most prevalent is because of the variety of anxiety disorders can exist. But the most common one is the generalized anxiety. And this generalized anxiety has double the likelihood of women will experience it than men. So what is generalized anxiety? Well, it's this feeling of restlessness, like on edge. You kind of get tired easily. You have difficulty focusing or concentrating. You get irritated kind of easily. You're worrying all the time. It's difficult to get it under control. You cannot just stop yourself. And even at times at night when you're trying to sleep, your brain won't stop and you keep worrying about what's happening during the day or whatever it is concerning you. So it's not just this for a few days, but it's at least 6 months somebody has been consistently having these symptoms. The next anxiety disorder is panic disorder. This is when somebody has a panic attack. So panic attacks is interesting because you can have a complete physiological reaction to a threat that you don't know what it is. Sometimes a person knows that and is becoming very panicky, but they don't know why, or they know why. But they have heart palpitations, their heart is going really, really fast. Sometimes they're sweating, sometimes they're shaking and trembling, they have difficulty breathing. It's just an overwhelming sense of terror that something is going to happen, and they feel that they're going to have lose control. Some people end up in the ER thinking that they're having a heart attack when in reality it's a panic attack. Some people have panic disorder for a long period of time. They actually end up fearing having a panic attack, and what causes the panic attack is the fear of having those panic attacks because they have had it so consistently for such a significant period of time, and they don't know when it's going to happen. It comes out of nowhere that they fear them coming on, and sometimes just that fear perpetuates that cycle of panic. The next one is phobias. That's a specific phobias of any type. It's an unreasonable fear of something. It could be an object, a situation. So phobias can be pretty broad, actually. You can be afraid of flying, you can be afraid of spiders, you can be afraid of snakes, basically anything, a person even. You can be afraid of men, anything in particular like that. So phobias is another anxiety and extreme fear over specific things, which is something that a lot of people have, specifically in one or another form of phobia that sometimes they don't tell. I have fear of heights, I have fear of close places, things like that. The next anxiety disorder is agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is fear of being in open spaces or closed spaces and transportation. And sometimes people are so afraid of what's going on in the environment that they have to stay in their homes, and they're afraid of getting out of their houses because of the fear of being outside. So they stay inbound. Social anxiety, which before was called social phobia but is now known as social anxiety, is anxiety of being judged or rejected by others. So many times being around people say, I'm just very anxious around people. Many times it's because we are self-conscious and thinking too much of what the people are thinking, how they're looking at us, how they're responding. So it's a fear of rejection and a fear of judgment that really leads the social anxiety. The next is separation anxiety, and we think of this mostly with children, but it can happen in adults as well. Is when we are afraid, like in a child, oh, my dad or my mom is going away, and they cry incessantly thinking they're not coming back. An adult can have that same fear and also have separation anxiety of feeling that they're going to lose their loved one in a rational way, not necessarily that they are losing them for real, but in a rational way. So it's that significant attachment person, the person that is the most important to us, and we are afraid of losing it in a rational way, that's separation anxiety. The next one is obsessive compulsive disorders. People who have obsessive compulsive disorders are, as the word says, obsessed and on an object or something, and they have to compulsively do something to get themselves to calm down. For example, somebody who feels, oh, somebody might break in my house and I need to lock the door, and for them to make sure and be totally calm, they go around the house 4 or 5 times, checking every doorknob, making sure it's locked. Not just once, but several times to ensure that it's okay. That's the compulsive nature of that. Somebody who's germophobic, in other words, who can be very compulsive in cleaning their hands every so often, or if they touch something, immediately they clean hands. Right now, we all need to. You need to be a little bit compulsive with that. But that was obsessive compulsive disorder. We can do it with a variety of ways and things that it just doesn't necessarily have to be with cleaning. Some people have it with thoughts or numbers. For example, they were obsessed with just being number 3, and everything has to be in threes. That kind of thing for the obsessive compulsive disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder. This one is mostly associated with people going to wars and veterans, but in reality it can happen to everyone who have had a traumatic event in their lives. It doesn't have to be just war. It could be a rape, a homicide that they witnessed, a fire that they witnessed, a car accident, any traumatic event. And usually it's for an extended period of time that somebody is having these symptoms. They have what we call flashback or memories of the event coming and inundating your mind at different times without any warning, having nightmares about what happened, avoiding people, situations, and things that remind you of those events. Those are some of the symptoms of traumatic stress disorder. And lastly, acute stress disorder. And this is actually PTSD. The difference is that it's only for 3 days to a month, but anything that lasts more than a month of those symptoms goes over to PTSD. So acute stress disorder could be a car accident that immediately after that car accident, we get out of the car and we having this hypervigilance, which is another symptom of PTSD, and we're avoiding driving the car because I'm afraid of getting into an accident again. So acute stress disorder is similar, it's just shorter period of time and it's not over a lifetime like some people who have experiences of PTSD. So as we can see, anxiety is something that is worldwide, in the United States, everywhere, and we have a lot of people who are impacted by it. We have specific phobias that the majority of people, not the majority, a lot of people have, from 7 to 9% of the population have some type of anxiety, which is a persistent fear of something. 7% of the population have social anxiety. 2% have generalized anxiety. 1% have OCD. 2 to 3% have panic disorders. 2% have agoraphobia. 1 to 2% have separation anxiety. And 3 to 4% of the population have experienced or are experiencing PTSD. So as you can see, anxiety is very prevalent in our community. Well, what not to say to people with anxiety? This is very important because we sometimes think, oh, it's so obvious that it's an irrational fear. So if I just tell them it's irrational, it's going to be okay, and just calm down, something that you shouldn't say. I mean, we say that to people, but we need to be careful not saying, because we're saying it like if it was that simple. If you have experienced anxiety, you can be all rational and very intellectual all you want. When you're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack or anything like that, it just happened. I tell my clients, it's okay. Just make yourself comfortable, especially those who are having a panic attack. It's gonna pass. Just let it pass. Sometimes you're struggling with it and people telling you do this and that is making it worse. I actually suggest to parents who their children are having panic attacks to be calm. Because one of the things I see is that the parents are so anxious about the kids being anxious that they're making their kids more anxious. So the best thing to do when you're around somebody who's anxious is to remain calm, give them the space to take care of themselves, and ask, what do you need from me? Don't assume anything. So don't say, yeah, this is not a big deal, you're being rational. What are you so anxious about? Or even, I know how you feel. Even if you have gone out, I always say this, even if you have gone through exactly the same thing that another person, and you think you have gone through exactly the same thing the other person has, that doesn't mean that you really know how that person feels, because you don't know how that person feels until you are that person walking in their shoes. Just telling them to stop, it's not going to work. Trust me. People with anxiety, if they could stop by just telling themselves to stop, they would. Because the feeling of anxiety is nothing fun. Just breathe. Yeah? There's a way of breathing and you can help them. But I think that's at times how we say it too. The other thing is, I love in our communities, sometimes in the Hispanic communities, what I'm referring, that we all think we're doctors sometimes. Did you try this little tea? Or you did X, Y, or Z? Sometimes that's not useful either in the moment. So telling them it's all in their head or to get over it is not very helpful. Sometimes it's just ask the person for what they need. So I want you to think about this. God wants us not to worry about tomorrow. So we don't need to be telling, oh, God doesn't want us to do that. That's not what I'm talking about. This is kind of the gateway for what we're going to talk about next week. Because we're going to find out that we have in the tools for coping skills, some tools that are very essential that we use in our spiritual walk that are very useful. Do not think that because you suffer anxiety or depression or any other mental health issue that has anything to do with your spiritual well-being. We sometimes say, well, that you must be not spiritually well. That's not helpful nor truth. Some of the people who have been very depressed, I think Mother Teresa, one of them, Paul, Apostle Paul in the Bible, they have said that sometimes what they think was that problem that he had that God would not take away was depression. We don't know really. I think in part we don't know because God wants us to put our problem there. But the most important part is that we have some tools that we're going to be talking about next week that can help us dealing with anxiety. And we're going to build upon the tools that we had used depression, because anxiety and depression oftentimes comes together, and they have the thought process, the negative thoughts and the thoughts that are irrational that go with anxiety and depression. But we're also going to deal with the physiological aspect of anxiety and how to deal with our physiological responses to calm our body down, not just with our mind, so we can deal with what's going on. So I expect you here next week in our session of caring for our mind in our anxiety escape artist, the last part.